Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bring another really awesome guest involved in science, technology, creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. On today's show, we're going to be joined by Joel Krikston. He is a seasoned executive with extensive experience in venture investments, in strategic innovation within the healthcare sector, and currently serves as both managing director of venture investments at the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, but he's also co-founder of Merck's Idea Studios. This is a really interesting, it's a about 15-month-old global innovation hub model that Merck is committing money to ultimately scale these high-impact health technologies that directly align with Merck's access and R&D priorities, strategically located currently in both innovation hubs of Merck in both Singapore and Berlin. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Joel has held various pivotal roles at organizations like Merck, but also at J&J, at JPMorgan, focusing on areas as diverse as biotech, corporate development, health equity, and as managing director of the venture investments, he really excels in bridging the gap between life sciences and digital health tech. He's also a recognized advocate for diversity and inclusion, emphasizing health equity in various professional endeavors. He has numerous board engagements as well, showcasing his commitment to building these companies. And he also contributes a lot to academia as a venture mentor and guest lecturer at places like NYU Stern, Princeton. Joel has his MBA actually from Stern at NYU. He also did his undergrad work in finance and international business at Fairfield University, went on to get a variety of specialized certifications at Harvard and MIT in all things AI and healthcare tech, underscoring his dedication to continued learning, leadership, and healthcare innovation. A lot of really cool themes to get into today, and really excited to have him with us today. Joel Krikston, thank you so much for taking time on the show today.
Cool, Ira. Thanks for having me.
Great having you. I'm really looking forward to this. And I was joking before the show, it's not Bill Toronto, but we have another awesome guest from Merck. So I'm really glad to have you today. Joel, I'd love to start off. I read a little bit about your bio, but clearly, you studied finance early on, did your MBA at Stern, and sort of went fast and furious into the healthcare investment banking space, ABN AMRO, JPMorgan, BNP Paribas, a lot of really important shops there. Tell us a little bit about you and what got you when the sort of healthcare bug, investment banking wise, sort of bit you.
It's funny. I think when you go to NYU, it's hard to not end up in investment banking. It's such a great school. I think as the dean used to say, if he was God and could put a business school anywhere, it'd be halfway between Wall Street and Midtown Manhattan. So it was really easy to get pulled into interactions with alumni and learning more about investment banking. It was a great way as a young professional to see all kinds of different transactions, start to get a feel for what it meant to assess different types of companies. I randomly was placed in the healthcare banking group when I joined Paribas, which was a great experience. Most of it was around healthcare services. Mm-hmm. This was the era of Y2K, dating myself, right? Coming out in 1999. So we were all waiting for every single skilled nursing facility to shut down and hospital to shut down. And obviously none of that transpired, thankfully. I think it was also the era of the genomic bubble and the internet bubble, and technology was really coming to the fore again. What was interesting is that when I was at Paribas in my first opportunity, and also worked for them for 6 months in Europe, getting a little bit of taste for what it meant to see some other markets, interact with other types of professionals from different countries around the world was really a great experience for me. But when I got back, all the rage was what was happening with the genome and obviously what was happening with the internet. So Chase, I left Paribas and joined Chase, who had just acquired a small investment bank out of San Francisco called Hambrecht and Quist.
Hmm.
Old timers will know that name because that's
Yep.
actually the group that started the famous JPMorgan conference.
Yep.
Chase and acquired H&Q because many of these larger firms were trying to get closer to the world of IPOs, private placements, and some of the exciting things that were happening in venture capital. So I had a chance to work with the H&Q team, and that's really what set the hook. I was seeing bankers having this disproportionate influence and relationship on entrepreneurs. They were really in the room as strategic partners, not to knock the bulge bracket firms and working on big bond deals or huge M&A deals, but those were more process driven. These H&Q bankers had an extraordinary relationship with their clients, and that was really intoxicating to me. So I did everything I could to swim over to that side of the shop and started to spend time working on IPOs, sitting around with these management teams, thinking about how they tell their story. How does that story translate to their P&L, their forecasts, their growth mapping? And of course, venture capital was always a part of those stories. So I think in the 2003-ish timeframe, I knew that I wanted to be closer to innovation and where innovation was happening,
Hmm.
which might mean not being in the banking world. So I had a chance in 2006 to jump over to Johnson and Johnson and really work in a fascinating group on their diagnostics team. They were really trying to reinvent the diagnostics business. And so I was a quarterback, a business development quarterback, trying to lead a cross-functional team of marketing people and product development people and medical affairs, et cetera, to say, where is there a need in the market for a novel diagnostic?
Hmm.
Think about something like abdominal aortic aneurysm. There's screening approved, but nobody has it happen. And 70% of AAA patients are first diagnosed when they're laying on the floor, in their bedroom or in their bathroom. We have to be able to do better than that. So we would sit around as a team. It was very entrepreneurial and say, let's think up new business cases for diagnostics. Where can we disrupt the current algorithm? And if we could introduce this test, really have a meaningful impact on clinical outcomes and on patient care. And I did that for 3 years and it was super fun. If we got it approved from our management board, really like a new business, I would then go out and try and find that technology in the world, whether it was coming out of academia, whether it was coming out of biotech. Most of that was licensing and M&A type transactions, not
Yep.
venture. But it adds to the story of getting closer to this, being in the room, the ideation phase of thinking about innovation. I think it was also the link that said, how do I bring innovation into these really large, multinational, complex pharmaceutical and life sciences companies?
Hmm.
They all talk about it all the time, but how do you actually turn it into a transaction? How do you turn it into something where you can bring new thought, where you can do that in the context of understanding the challenges and the processes large organizations go through to truly launch new products? And
Hmm.
I think that set me on my way to venture capital. So I had a chance in 2009 to leave that team and join JJDC,
Sure.
which was J&J's famous venture fund, one of the oldest corporate venture funds, frankly, in the world,
Yep.
and had a fabulous mentor there and a guy named Brad Vale, who really was fascinated by how do large corporations use venture and almost demystifying it a little bit from the famous, let's use it to go learn, and more of this is really just early business development. This is what large organizations can do to explore new technology applications in their hands in a way before they make a larger commitment. That commitment could be ultimately building a platform like that. It could be acquiring some of these things. But if you're a Merck or you're a Johnson and Johnson and you're looking at something like digital health, just to bring it back to this conversation, that may not be my core competency.
Right.
So why don't we make an investment so that we have a relationship with some of these technologies that goes beyond a pure vendor relationship, and then hand them some of the problem statements and some of the use cases that we're working on where we're a little bit challenged and we think their tool could be the solution. But it has to be a real pilot. It has to be a real project. This isn't studying trends in AI and presenting a PowerPoint presentation to someone, right? We're actually doing something real. And then let's feed that information back in a constant loop to senior leadership to say, this is what it looks like. When we use AI to try and find lung cancer patients earlier, this is actually what it looks like. Should we do more of this? Should we do less of this? When we use a patient engagement system to help patients in the community that are on complex oncology drugs get more access to resources and educational materials and care navigation, this is what that looks like. Should we do more? Should we do less? So I've been very fortunate working with Bill now for more than 12 years, which is sort of amazing. But 12 years, Merck has made this huge commitment to this space, which is really inspiring. And then I think as we'll talk about moving on here, we've developed a playbook to really bring our portfolio companies together with Merck teams, but also export that playbook to other parts of the world where the process still holds. The use cases are different. Some of the investments may look a little bit different, but really inspiring stuff, we think.
No, absolutely. And I enjoy, thinking as you're talking about sort of the last 20 years of, this transition from, okay, here's big pharma doing its own research to, a lot of transactions and then licensing and getting, our hands into the earlier stage stuff, into the corporate venture capital world where we play around with even earlier stage that, as you were saying, might not be core, but we want to put some money down. And now we're going somewhere even more interesting, or sort of the next stage of this evolution with what you're doing per Idea Studios, because this is not just, hey, here's some lab space you guys can use over here, or we may throw a little money your way. This is a little different, a really integrated system, sort of part venturing, part incubator, part accelerator, a lot going on. So take a little time, take a few minutes, of course, if you would, to just reintroduce Merck Global Health Innovation, and then a little bit of what 15 months ago was the impetus to, like, hey, we can create something a little different here per the early stage companies, per our internal capabilities, and build something per the Idea Studios that hasn't been done before.
Perfect. So I think as you think about what the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund is, and really what Bill's vision was 15 years ago, we as Merck, or frankly, any life sciences company, we exist in a much, much broader healthcare ecosystem. And many of the things, the incredible innovations that come out of laboratories, be they vaccines, be they therapeutics, for them ultimately to have success, there are multiple codependencies that exist in that healthcare ecosystem that we don't control, that we don't operate, that we don't have a specific business in to try and support what's coming out of research.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's in support of our research and development colleagues, whether it's in support of our commercial colleagues, whether it's in support of our manufacturing, supply chain, IT colleagues, there are many examples, and we can go through some of those, where for a patient who is on a given therapy to see success, they may need access to other types of resources. Physicians may need help peeling through thousands of clinical trials to try and get evidence that helps inform what kind of a care pathway a patient should be on.
Mm-hmm.
We may have products sitting in complex logistical supply chains that have temperature dependencies that we don't control for. So we're counting on suppliers to use legacy technology to make sure there aren't temperature excursions that could impact either the performance of the product or the safety to the patient. So just because they're not things that we do, just because they're not competencies that we have, or even if we wanted to perform those activities, maybe they don't fit the remit of our shareholders and our strategy, that they're things we should specifically be investing in. It doesn't mean we can't have a role in trying to build up those utilities, if you will, if you think of them that way, in the broader healthcare ecosystem. And so what GHI was created to do is say, let's not focus on the therapeutics. Merck has the leading scientific laboratories in the world to create new therapies and vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And we have venture funds at Merck who specifically focus on early stage therapeutics and do their work to seed that pipeline over time. Our remit is to go look at this broader healthcare ecosystem and say, how can we invest using venture capital to make these other entities that we have codependencies on stronger, to create capabilities around our business leaders that they can partner with to drive any varied range of initiatives that support physicians and patients and other stakeholders that are in that ecosystem. So that's really what Bill created 15 years ago. I think over the last 8 years, what we've really perfected is the way we as a fund organize our calling effort, if you will, on the Merck customer. I cover Merck commercial teams globally. I have a partner who covers all of our R&D colleagues and a partner who covers manufacturing and supply chain. Our job is to go in and be in the room with them, listen to the strategic priorities that they have, and listen for signals where some challenge in their business would probably benefit from some form of external innovation. So an example of that in the United States, I think I alluded to earlier, would be something like lung cancer diagnosis.
Yep.
Famously, patients are found much too late. Many of these incredible miracle immunotherapies for oncology are now being approved for earlier and earlier indications. So, but for the fact that we don't find patients sooner, we still have terrible outcomes when it comes to lung cancer. Should Merck build every diagnostic related to trying to find patients sooner, whether that diagnostic is something that's happening in a pathology or a radiology lab, or whether that diagnostic increasingly is happening because AI is synthesizing clinical data, claims data, demographic data to call a patient high risk sooner based simply on a digital footprint? Those aren't our core competencies, but they have a huge impact on the efficacy and the access to our medications. So GHI can activate around a use case like that and say, let's go out and find really interesting modalities that can move the needle on early lung cancer diagnosis. Let's invest in those utilities so that they're more broadly available to patients, regardless of the therapeutic that's ultimately chosen, right? These are all sort of above the brand initiatives. And then Merck and other life sciences companies can compete based on the quality of their science. But we can do things to make that ecosystem stronger, more robust, and functioning better for patients and for doctors. So that's really what GHI does. Today, we have about 50 partnerships between our portfolio companies and Merck teams, which is something we're very proud of. That's really what we would think of as strategic value. Corporate venture capitalists are always chasing this ghost called strategic value. If you're a venture fund where the output is that your parent typically buys the asset you've invested in, that's a pretty linear metric and easy to measure. If you're GHI, almost by definition, Merck's not buying a lot of the things that we invest in. So how do we show Merck value? How do I show the CFO value to say, this is why you've allotted this amount of capital to us? And what's fun for us is that can take many, many forms, all compliant, of course, but perhaps we're helping teams generate real world evidence faster in support of our products that are in the marketplace. Perhaps we're finding patients sooner, as we've just described. Perhaps we're working on affordability solutions in India so that in a country where 60, 70% of the populace has little to no insurance, and despite their desire to have access to life-saving cancer vaccines, affording it is not a reality given their current per capita spend on healthcare. What if certain fintech players can enable things like crowdfunding and lending marketplaces that we can help enable so that patients now can tackle some of the bottlenecks and challenges that prevent them from getting to those therapies? So that's who GHI is. And I think for us to go into the marketplace today, and what's so rewarding, especially coming out of something like Health this week, which we all just spent 5 days in Vegas as part of this massive healthcare conference that really brings together stakeholders from across the ecosystem. I think we've now earned and established a reputation that we truly are differentiated as a strategic investor because we are doing the hard work for entrepreneurs to map out who the customer is inside Merck, where the budgets are, the form of a partnership that we believe and they believe could enable and progress some of these ideas. And if you're an entrepreneur of a 50-person company, navigating a 70,000-person global pharmaceutical company, not easy. You can waste many, many months, years, and cycles trying to figure that out. We're doing that work for you. So if we've come to you and we show an interest in investing in your company, it's probably because we've already done a lot of work to understand what we think a partnership could look like that would be beneficial to both our patients and our customers and our business as well as yours. What I think happened in the last 15 months was a realization to say, this is really working well. But by nature, venture capital is a very local business.
Right.
And half of our business is outside the United States. Merck is in 150 countries around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I take this playbook and export it into other markets? We're known as MSD outside the United States. How do I help MSD colleagues access this venture fund in the same way our colleagues in the US are doing it? And the realization was we need some partnership. We need to find some regional innovation teams that have a remit across their geography to essentially be the eyes and ears in the marketplaces, whether it be Jakarta or Ho Chi Minh City or Mumbai, to say we know what the priorities in those markets are because they may look very different from the priorities here in the US. Can they get agreement and alignment among the MSD stakeholders in that region that these are use cases they'd like to focus on? If that's a yes, is there an ecosystem of innovation, startups, et cetera, that we could invest in like we do here? If that's a yes, will they bring some capital to the table in the form of sponsoring pilots and partnerships so that we can actually test these things, not talk about them?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's a yes, we as GHI will come in with the venture capital and get an allocation from our investment committee to support you. This conversation started about 5 years ago. We launched them 18 months ago, and they have been incredibly successful and really inspiring, quite frankly. Some of the human health stories, some of the things that we are enabling in these markets for patients and for clinicians is really exciting. So out of our idea studio in Singapore, we've now made 4 investments. That covers 12 markets across Asia Pacific, not including China and Japan, where we would take a more direct approach in those markets. But we've made 2 investments in India right now. We're working on 2 more. We've made an investment in Thailand, and we've made an investment in the Philippines. And this includes everything from the crowdfunding and the fintech example I gave you. We're working with novel insurance partners in some of these markets who are trying to work with employers that are increasingly offering their employees healthcare benefits, which of course opens the door many times for people to have access and to have affordability options around healthcare. And again, all of these things are much bigger than any of our brands. These are all above the brand initiatives to build and invest in the ecosystem in some of these markets.
Mm-hmm.
We have an e-commerce platform in Thailand to try and give patients who often receive care through private hospitals better price transparency across any kind of procedure. Some of those may include preventative screenings, vaccination, et cetera. And we're even working with companies that are building infrastructure in some of these markets. So we're investing in women's health in India. We're investing in women's health in the Philippines. Really, really rewarding thing. It's doing a lot for my United mileage status, but I'll tell you, it's really inspiring when you are sitting in a cancer hospital in India or sitting in a vaccination center in Vietnam and thinking about what's possible just through what we do, the little thing that we do to move the needle for these patients, what's possible to really have an impact on healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And again, if there's specific examples that you prefer to go into, I just took a look per some of the the past discussions it had, and I thought we could just drill down a little bit on some of these because each one is equally interesting. And I guess before we go to Southeast Asia, maybe just because I think your most recent investment was in Europe, and there's a company called Axana that's involved in what you were talking about before in terms of sort of lung cancer prediction. And this is this whole theme of hey, lung cancer, although yes, as you're pointing out, we got these awesome monoclonal antibodies and immunotherapies and all that stuff, but there's a lot that goes on before you push the button on how we're going to treat with this, from screening, imaging, tissue biopsies, the whole oncogenomic profiling that happens nowadays. And Axana seems to be a very interesting platform that just is a way to bring together these clinicians all around Europe to say, okay, we have a plan for patient X, as opposed to trying to willy-nilly put together all this information, which some might be in Ireland, some might be in Greece, whatever the case may be. Can you talk a little bit about Axana? And I mean, I think it's a
Sure,
nice
100%.
example. Yeah.
So I think as this idea for what the studios could be started to take shape, it was clear to us that Europe would be another perfect place for us to deploy. Those are hugely important markets for all life sciences companies. Merck is no different. And we've always had a very good working relationship with our innovation colleagues in that region, but we don't have investors on the ground.
Mhm.
So, with the sponsorship of the managing director of MSD Germany and support from the regional president for MSD globally outside the US, we launched a second studio out of Berlin. And if you've ever been to Berlin, it's a fascinating city and it's actually an incredible hub
Yep.
for digital health innovation. We went over, spent a week or two just meeting with all kinds of different groups, other pharmaceutical companies that were experimenting in the space, government, digital health innovators, hospital systems, etc., and came back absolutely convinced that that was the right place between Berlin and Munich for us to base our hub out of Europe. We have a wonderful team out of Berlin with a lot of digital health experience that's now leading that studio. So they're my partners in that region. And as you mentioned, Oksana is one of the companies, one of the first investments that we've made out of that Berlin hub. So the challenge for physicians, which ultimately impacts patients, is if you think about the treatment pathway for oncology and simply the diagnostic pathway for oncology, it's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
You have patients that are going through all different types of modalities on the diagnostic front. They're probably meeting with lots of different types of clinicians, different specialties who are now involved in their diagnosis and care. And there's something called a multidisciplinary tumor board,
Yep.
where a hospital or a health system has a regular cadence where these experts come together to discuss patient cases. And that is really the trigger point where patients are then put onto some kind of a pathway that enables treatment. And many times that's the trigger point where newer indications, newer solutions, or even identifying patients for clinical trials is taking place. The problem, as you can imagine, is with such complexity around diagnostics and care, many of those multidisciplinary tumor boards in the past have suffered from that data being siloed across disparate systems, so that when you finally have all these experts together, the information that's needed to make those decisions isn't present. And we had a very innovative colleague out of Switzerland who had been working with an entrepreneur that had actually developed a relatively broad radiology platform, which was acquired. But within that platform, we had begun experimenting with him around this idea of bringing AI and bringing technology to the process of the multidisciplinary tumor board. If we could help these hospitals and health systems aggregate that data at the right time in front of the right users, could we actually have a meaningful impact to speed the ability of those teams to get patients onto the therapies that they should be on and have a really meaningful impact on care? So we are now about 6 to 12 months into that investment. Oksana just launched with their first NHS trust, which is incredibly exciting. So the technology, even in its barest form, is now live in a few locations in the UK, with plans to expand into multiple markets across Europe over the next couple of years. And again, I think this is what keeps you going doing this work, right? You can picture a future state where maybe 5 years from now, you have a decent number of hospitals and health systems across multiple markets in Europe that are leveraging AI and this new technology so that getting patients to the right care as quickly and as efficiently and as accurately as possible is actually happening. And we as GHI played a tiny little role along with our colleagues and obviously with the entrepreneurs who are driving the innovation to enable that change. We're also doing work out of Europe across a lot of other use cases. Again, access to vaccinations has become increasingly challenging and important. Awareness, education, information around the utility of these vaccines has become a crowded, noisy space where I think the industry itself is trying to figure out ways to bring it back to the conversation around patient care and science. We are working with different types of entities that are trying to help patients get access and information about vaccines. We're looking at companies that are doing things like diagnostics as a service, where payers, other stakeholders in some of these markets are saying, we want to drive vaccination compliance too. We understand that it's really important for patients to protect themselves against things like shingles or HPV, but we're not quite sure how to reach them. So if we can partner with those groups through venture capital, through startups to say, here's an entity that can do in-home testing to remove the burden of a patient who may be working, may have transportation, logistic issues, et cetera, and can't get to the testing that they need. Let's use in-home testing as a trigger, a call to action for these patients to start to explore the benefits of protecting themselves through vaccination. And again, we love those sorts of use cases where it's really the house of medicine saying, hey, life sciences, we would love to have you as part of this initiative. And life sciences, that's a great thing for us. We would love to show that we're more than just an entity that makes a product, throws it over the wall, and hopes for the best, right? We really are a partner in trying to solve for these healthcare challenges that affect these markets. So all of the work we do as GHI is to create those stories, to create those examples of where through venture capital, we're enabling startups, emerging technologies to tackle some of these challenges. And now through the Idea Studios, we have the ability to do that in many, many markets around the world.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about many markets, I think another and heading sort of over to Southeast Asia. um, I think one of the investments, which has been referred to as sort of the Airbnb of surgery, is this group HD, which is basically this online marketplace for elective surgeries. I think they've linked up something like 2,500 healthcare practitioners throughout the region. Again, it's a very elegant system. I'd love for you to mention it. I think it's an important investment in your portfolio, but at the same time it got me thinking. Clearly, as you're in whether you're in Thailand, Indonesia, wherever we're talking about, we're not just talking about these innovation centers coming online and tapping in this potential, but we have all these unique regulatory systems as well. And it got me thinking because Joe Romanelli is mentioned in your press release, president of your international unit at Merck. And I remember from a couple of years ago, there was a press release that he was in regarding some work you were doing down in, I think it was in Hong Kong or something, with regard to sort of medical tourism and stuff of that nature, which is also sort of a very hot theme that's come online. And it was just interesting to sort of reading about HD, whether that's sort of a piece of that puzzle as well. And if it is, that great. If not, whatever. But
no, it is, it is. And what's so interesting about that is if you said to me 3 years ago, you'll be an investor in a e-commerce platform in Thailand, I'd say, why? But I think what the beauty of these studios is that our teams in these regions are so well versed in the unique challenges of those markets that it's a huge educational experience for me. And if you're intellectually curious, and by default, I think if you're working in venture capital, you have to be.
Sure.
It puts so much wind back in your sails because you're looking at these new human health stories that you hadn't considered in the past. And of course, we're all relatively US centric because that's where we spend most of our day.
Mm.
It's really inspiring to think that by investing in novel types of capabilities, you can start to knock down some of these challenges. So HD is a fascinating partner for us. They are very creative in the way that they bring transparency and awareness to different groups across the region. And in Thailand, you have a very activated and informed customer. Sometimes the challenge isn't so much around convincing a populace of the value of vaccination, but it's actually addressing other issues in those markets, like having consumers feel like they're getting value, which seems like an odd comment in the United States because we all work through this somewhat opaque world of our insurers and our employee benefits, and it's sometimes hard to feel the linearity of price. In a lot of these markets, people are paying for things out of pocket. Mm-hmm. So there is absolutely a mentality around value. I want value for the dollar that I'm spending. And when you can't understand pricing, or when you can't understand, especially in the context of preventative healthcare, if I'm walking out with something that is in my hands, like a new pair of shoes or a beautiful handbag, I can sense value. I have a tangible thing on my person. If you're trying to convince me that I should spend a quarter of this month's paycheck on a preventative vaccine that I can't feel the tangible benefits of, that's a really difficult conversation.
Yeah.
So when we have a partner who has specialized in trying to bring healthcare consumers in that market this concept of value, and then we can take some of the materials we have and they're working with multiple pharmaceutical companies. Others can bring some of that content payload that's very difficult to deliver to consumers and actually get it in front of the buyer at the right moment in that cycle, in that purchasing decision pathway. That's been really, really impactful for us. And many times they'll go to where the consumer is. So they are setting up health camps at railroad stations and in shopping malls that are all very engaging, animated, interactive, safe places for patients to come into and feel as if there's no judgment. They're gaining information that they would like to have. How do they protect their families? Some of the markets that we're going to, there are significant legacy cultural taboos around the idea of vaccination, particularly when you're talking about something like HPV.
Mm.
Misinformation around who needs it, why they would need it. Does this mean they're living a certain type of lifestyle that is somehow shameful, et cetera? So one of the impetus for us in terms of looking at some of the women's health infrastructure in some of these markets is to really give women a safe place to come in and have a conversation about women's health that's not just maternal health. Many times in some of these markets, the only conversation on women's health is maternal health. Well, there's so many other aspects for women in terms of from vaccination to different types of screenings, thinking about menopause care, et cetera, that we can play a role in. Some of those things may never touch a product that we have an interest in, but that's fine. It's the
Mhm.
right infrastructure for that market. There are parts of the work that those companies are doing that will be important to our teams. And then I think one of the most touching things as we left Asia at the end of July was in a lot of these places, we said to the stakeholders in these markets, have you ever seen a pharmaceutical company show up like this? Where we run these partner IQ days and we invite the external environment in, multiple types of stakeholders, and then we bring a collective of our leaders in that market together and we spend 5 hours with them. And we talk about our business, we talk about our priorities, some of the challenges we're facing in terms of how we disseminate content or how we educate and support patients, et cetera. And then they come in and present to us their capabilities in the context of what some of those things are that we're working on. We spend an hour or two socializing, networking, et cetera. And it's so palpable to walk out of there. You feel the energy, the idea that these two groups can work together to solve some of those challenges. And as GHI and as the Idea Studios, we can be the glue that brings them together. It doesn't have to be something that, boy, it sure would be nice if we could find a way to partner on this. We can actually say, here's a vehicle where we in fact can. We have a partnership team that's part of the studio. They can explore with you independently what a partnership might look like.
Mhm.
And we have an investment team that can explore with you independently how we might be able to support your business through venture capital. This isn't philanthropy. We are capitalists. We would like a return on our investment. Is your business, in fact, a venture backable business? Let's spend time. Let's go through let's do all the things we would normally do. And when we find the combination where those two things fit together, it's a really powerful moment. So again, in 18 months, we have 6 deals. I think by the end of next year, we will have north of 10 and are already building some really interesting stories, both to share with the broader community, but certainly for our Merck and MSD leaders to have really tangible examples of what we're doing beyond our core business to be a part and a contributor to this broader healthcare ecosystem.
Mhm. And one of the things that's always been front and center when I've had Bill on the show in the past has been scalability, and ultimately whether you know we're talking about an AI application or supply chain or whatever the case may be, but ultimately if we can't scale this thing very quickly, exponentially, we have problems. And I love, Joe, if you could just talk a little bit about that, because clearly in this accelerator slash laboratory slash venture studio model that Merck is feeding in its knowledge of, Merck is very good at scaling stuff. Can you say a couple of words about, the advice, how you mentor in that particular area of how you get some of these tools, whether it's HD, whether it's Econ Care in India, or the group you're working with in the Philippines, that get on that sort of that bandwidth of we got to scale this thing fast and properly, so it gets to with a lot of patients out there that we care about.
When the conversation started 5 years ago on this idea, one of the reasons that conversation started is that the head of the Southeast Asia region at the time had become a good friend and sort of mentor to me. And he was saying that one of the challenges that he was facing was that he could see teams in each market trying to experiment with interesting things. but there was no mechanism for them to share best practices. There was no mechanism for them to align around use cases. And so how could he create some kind of a vehicle that would enable this learning? And part of that was the genesis of the Idea Studio as well. So I think our philosophy there, it's easy for a company in Boston who wants to take their solution to San Diego to do that. It's really hard for a company in Munich to take their solution to Rome, even though geographically they're not that far apart, but that they can't actually find the same regulatory conditions. They can't find the same payer conditions. They are walking into a very different and challenging marketplace. And of course, that's the case across many of these markets. So part of the idea for the Idea Studios was to say, if we get the right use cases, we can run an experiment in the Netherlands or in Indonesia. And then can we use that as a blueprint to take to some of these other markets and say, look, the vendors we're working with in these markets may be different, but the approach to the solution can have many of the same pieces. So the second time we build it, even if we have to build it anew in each market, we're much, much smarter at how to build it based on the lessons learned of the first one. And in fact, we're doing that right now in India. I think one of the things that's appealing is to also work with venture builders, groups who are, whether we invest in the venture builder itself, like we did in the Philippines, and then are working with them across all of their portfolio companies to run different types of campaigns, awareness programs, patient support programs. Or if we actually go into a market and work with a venture builder from scratch to say, there's no preventative healthcare system. There's no space bandwidth for what we would call a primary care physician to even have a conversation around preventative health. They are seeing 10 to 50x the patient flow that a clinician in the United States is seeing. They are spending half their time performing surgeries or different procedures, and they're not even in their office, right? The access to technology that would explain the longitudinal health history of a patient doesn't exist. So how are you going to sit down with a patient that's coming in who you may have 4 minutes with and say, let's talk about preventative cancer screening. Let's talk about a chronic care management plan around your high cholesterol. It's just not happening. There's no space for it to happen. Well, what about if we created an organization or an entity that could provide services to those clinicians and essentially amplify their access to all kinds of different preventative regimes, be it vaccination, screenings, chronic care management? Can we build something like that here? See how it works. See if it's actually having an impact on patients getting vaccinated for a whole host of different types of routines. The patients are showing willingness. There's actually tailwinds from the government pushing national immunization programs. Healthcare is front and center for many of these leaders around the world, not surprisingly. Let's take advantage of those tailwinds, build that blueprint and test it. And if it works here, let's take it to Indonesia. Let's take it to the Philippines. It may be a different approach slightly, but we've got really good evidence from the first launch that would enable us to build or scale something like this in another market very quickly. That's also part of our approach. That's part of our strategy. And I love that part of corporate venture capital, frankly. We don't have to wait around for someone to dream up the startup we're thinking of, and then we get to invest. We can build companies if we want to, but there's no reason you can't do that. And I think some of the best CVCs I see, I think some of the best, obviously, VCs we see, that's really what they do. In fact, many of them do it exclusively. They only want to spend capital on efforts where they've spent 6 months, 12 months. I remember famously working with Josh Macauer, the famous medtech entrepreneur out on the West Coast when I was at J&J. He would tell of a process where his team would spend 12 to 24 months just looking at the problem. And then they would go find the best executives, people with experience, people who fit the roles that were necessary to be successful, and they would build those companies from scratch. And obviously his track record speaks to the success of some of those companies that he's built. Who has more expertise in healthcare than life sciences? We have extraordinary depth of understanding around human disease, care pathways, that kind of a thing. Let's partner with the community, the healthcare community, and bring and build some new innovations to bear in some of these markets.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that confirms that that's the right pathway is it's very inspiring to see all of these seasoned entrepreneurs from some of these countries outside the US, many of whom have worked in companies in the US and or gotten their graduate degrees in the US. They're coming back to their local markets. They're coming back to their communities to say, we see a huge opportunity to build things that don't even exist, to help patients, to help clinicians, to move the needle around some of these diseases where, frankly, there's very low-hanging fruit to improve human health. When you have 1.5 billion people in India and less than 1% of them are vaccinated for HPV, that's a devastating human health crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have a vaccine that prevents cancers. Let's work with local groups. Let's work with stakeholders in that community to start tackling some of the barriers for patients to get access to care. And again, that would translate to many other vaccines from many other life sciences companies. This isn't just an MSD story. But I think when you're spending your days working on solving those kinds of problems, it feels really big and meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing venture for 20 years. God bless everyone making phone apps still that remind me to take my pill. Like this is different stuff, right? This is really meaningful stuff. And I think those are the stories that we want to tell.
Right. And as you're saying, Joe, you have the existing investments now. I think it's about 6, but you're going to have obviously a lot more next year. Could you just say a couple words about the process in this? I mean, is it more like you're sending out business development type teams from the idea studios to find these opportunities? I mean, it's not like having something on the website to send me your business plan. This is obviously a little different than a traditional sort of venture capital setup. But what's, for investment 7 through 20 now, what goes on in finding those investments to bring into the shop?
It's fun. I think one of the skills we have to master as the idea studio is we don't have authority over all these groups.
Okay.
We have to be able to influence without authority, this famous corporate unicorn skill. So I think what we do is we go into these markets and we say, we are a resource for you. One of the things that's made GHI very successful is this servant leadership mentality. We show up and say, we are not your digital health center of excellence. We are not your consultant who tells you what your strategy should be. I go into leaders all across Merck and MSD and say, you have a $600 million venture fund, and it's my job to teach you how to use it. So tell me what you're working on. Your strategy is my strategy. It may never result in a venture capital investment. The right solution may be for you to go partner with Amazon. Great. We have 20 years of institutional knowledge of what's been tried. We, across the team, have expertise in venture capital that spans 20 plus years. We've seen just about every form of a business model you could possibly imagine. And worst case scenario, let us in the room as you're starting to think about these challenges, and we'll lend our ear, our network, and our expertise. Through the studios, we also now have a vehicle where if the right solution presents itself, which is both investable and where we can partner, we can also bring you resources from the organization. We have venture capital at our disposal. We have a pilot to run budgets at the commercial team's disposal, right? So we can actually enable your effort in a way that if you're all by yourself as a great innovator sitting in Belgium or fill in the blank, Spain, right? You may have a great idea, you don't know how to get it funded. You may have a great idea, you don't know how to look at the landscape of potential partners. You may have a great idea, and somebody may have a very similar idea that's sitting in Bulgaria that's been tried. We can bring you together and help you understand and accelerate your process and also hopefully make it much more successful. So I think the idea of deals 7 through 20 is to start telling the stories of what we've already done, socializing what success looks like, which is always a huge part of our effort as GHI, whether it's through the studios or whether it's here in the US. Helping these groups understand that we are not a competitor to your innovation strategy. We are not here to displace the people you may have already hired to be innovators, right? Who doesn't want to be an innovator? So we're not here to claim that title. We're here to work with you through our resources and with our tools to help enable your strategy, not ours. And I think that's been very successful for us. We're already seeing extraordinary traction through the studios in terms of the region seeing this effort. And we're very thankful to MSD leaders outside the US who have really amplified the fact that the studios are live, that this is an initiative that they're highly supportive of. I think that's what leads to deals 7 through 20 and beyond, of course. The best the best days for us is when my phone rings and it's someone inside Merck or MSD who says, we're starting a project around something that's coming in the next 3 to 4 years. And we know that there are going to be challenges in the broader healthcare ecosystem that will ultimately determine the success of this thing for patients and for clinicians. Can you come in and listen? Can you or a member of your team come in and listen and lend GHI's ear and expertise to what we're talking about? And 90% of the time, that won't be a venture investment. But we've sort of earned the right to be a thought partner with some of these different groups, which is all you can ask for. We're 9 people trying to cover a 70,000 person organization, which almost by definition is an impossibility. But over 15 years, Bill has built a team that has established this reputation, I think, across Merck and MSD, where we now have groups introducing other groups to us. I was referred by so-and-so to talk to you all. That's very inspiring.
Yeah, no, it's again, 7 through 20 is going to be quite exciting, and it'd be interesting to look at your passport over the next couple of years, and again see sort of the regions and areas that a lot of these innovations come from. But yeah, no, I'm excited for you. I think it's an awesome model, and again, it's been a really interesting evolution as you've walked us through the last couple decades of what's been going on here, but it's exciting. But Joe, bringing it back now to where we started off, and that's New York City. I have 3 kids, and I'll let you know that 2 of them are at NYU right now. None of them are interested in biotech and in the pharma industry, sadly. I mean, I got my daughter is interested in genetics, but we'll see where that ends up. Could you just say a couple words about your venture mentorship that you're still doing at NYU? Because I think you do get there quite a bit to teach kids about, hey, you got a decent idea. This is what venture capital is all about, and this is how you get your idea going.
I try and do a couple of things. I mean, I grew up in Pittsburgh. My mother's a Catholic school teacher, and my dad's a social worker. Nobody was talking about venture capital or investment banking in my house. I promise you that. So I think there's very much a pay it forward sort of mentality that I have. And a lot of that came from New York City writ large. I got to New York City and it was just mind blowing. The diversity, just the people you would meet in your normal course of life, all of the different perspectives. And I think also NYU was an extraordinary place for me. There was a woman there named Margaret O'Hara, love her to death still to this day, who was the one driving career placement at Stern's Business School. And this woman took such an extraordinary interest, certainly in my career, but in the career of so many people, and opened doors for me that nobody ever would have opened. I didn't understand what networking was until I was 35 years old. So I think when somebody touches your life that way, she's the one who had the relationship at a Paribas to say, you should take a bet on this guy. Hire this guy. I know he's coming. I was coming out of automotive finance. So that is not a natural bridge into investment banking and healthcare. But, what can I do now to try and repay what somebody did for me, right? So if I get a call from an NYU to say, we're doing a demo day, would you come be a judge? Or if I get a call from a friend of mine who runs a biotech venture firm in Princeton and says, I'm teaching a class on entrepreneurship, would you come in and be a guest speaker and talk about corporate venture capital? Once a month at least, whatever comes in on LinkedIn, and I know we all get a lot of things on LinkedIn, I try and take one random person who had the moxie to reach out and say, I'm a student at XYZ school, and I'm sort of interested in how you got to what you're doing. Can I have 30 minutes of your time? And I give them 30 minutes of my time. And I think when you hear updates from them on how things are going, that's very rewarding, right? I have 2 kids. One just finished at Cornell in May. The other one's at Penn State. Been a tough year for Penn State. But I try and embed this in them. This whole idea of building a network, not when you need something, but exactly when you don't, because then it's working for you in the background. It's surfacing new job opportunities when you're not looking. You have resources to call on for various types of expertise, those types of things. That's a skill. I could spend 5 more Zoom episodes on this with you, but it's something that to me, I think is missing. There's just, it's so hard for young people that are in school, mostly learning theory, to understand what the application of theory is in the real world. What do you people do? What does a
Mm.
banker do? What does a venture capitalist do? And I think when I get an opportunity to give some of that back, it's not even a chore for me. I enjoy it. I think people enjoy talking about what they do. And you feel like you're, again, having a little bit of impact on somebody who's doing the right things to try and inform themselves.
That's awesome. It's really awesome. And should I have someone someone up there that's doing something entrepreneurial, I'll let you know about it. But no, it's
Hey, we invested in a great company called Cancer IQ a couple years ago. The CEO,
nice.
Faye Ayodele, is an absolute force of nature, and they are trying to democratize early genetic screening for oncology
Right,
patients.
right,
So
right, right.
I would love to introduce your daughter to Faye, and I'm sure they would have a fantastic conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely take you up on that. No, but this is great, Joel. I'm excited. Again, I've always been intrigued by what's going on at the fund, but now with this new model, I think you're onto something really major here, and I look forward to seeing what investments 7 through 20 are, and to your continued success. In both of these organizations, but really great stuff. Again, for everybody out there that's going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with Joel Krikston, Director of Venture Investments, Merck Global Health Innovation Fund, co-founder, MSD Idea Studios. Joel, again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us, to educate us on everything going on there. Thanks for everything you do for human health. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via the type of work you're doing, the type of investments you make. Really an awesome story.
Ira, thanks so much. Great to spend an hour with you.
Really great having you.